So, okay, it's time to start. You are warmly welcome to follow the webinar of the Act with Nature Consortium. I'm Samsa Puttonen from University of Tampere. I'm the current principal investigator of the consortium and will chair this webinar. Our consortium has three partners: University of Tampere, University of Applied Sciences, and University of Surrey. And our four-year project is funded by Finnish Research Council. Try to change the slide. Okay, so we have 4 15-minute presentations, and there will be a couple of minutes for questions after each presentation. And in this webinar, we will mostly present unpublished results from manuscripts. We ask you to write the comments and questions to the chat, and Julia Chikaeva, a member of our research group, will follow the chat and pick up questions to discuss. To begin with, we are pleased to have Emeritus Professor Kalevi Korpela, who is the original PI and also the primus motor of the project with us. He will give us a short introduction to the background of the project and its research idea. Kalevi, please.
Thank you, Samsa. Good day, everyone, and welcome. My name is, as Samsa said, Kalevi Korpela, and I'm a professor emeritus of psychology at Tampere University. It was in September 2021 when a core group of people left the funding application for this Act with Nature project to the Research Council of Finland. The group was Kirsi Salonen, Jane-Veera Paakkolavaara, and I at the University of Tampere, Katriina Hyvönen at the Jyväskylä University of Applied Sciences, where Jane-Veera has a second affiliation, and Eleanor Radcliffe at the University of Surrey, UK. For the Finnish core group, the project was a continuation of a previous 3-year project where this Act with Nature intervention was used as a rehabilitation program for depressive patients. That project was funded by the Social Insurance Institution of Finland. The results were positive, and we observed that nature sessions produced restorative experiences that mediated the decrease in depression. For the current project, we wanted to include ordinary working-age adults and also wanted to focus not only on well-being, but also on promoting pro-environmental behavior. Thus, we also sought collaboration with ecologists that study the concrete ecological consequences of different behaviors. Janne Kotiaho at the University of Jyväskylä and Eemeli Tsupari at VTT Technical Research Center of Finland. Moreover, previous research had shown that merely providing information or rewarding different behaviors was not sufficient for behavioral change. We noted that a more therapy-like approach is needed, where we try to increase nature connectedness and the ability to cope with environment-related emotions through planned and guided nature experiences and social support. So we got a positive funding decision and started in 2022. I myself retired in the beginning of 2025, and Professor Samsa Puttonen took the lead in this project. And since 2022, there are several people who have joined the project and were not mentioned here by me, but were seen on Samsa's starting slide, and I hope you will get to know them better from the presentations today and from the forthcoming publications of the project. I don't know anything about the results of the project, and I am as eager as everyone to hear about them. Thanks for the research team, and thanks for joining us today. You are heartily welcome. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Kalevi, for your kind and insightful words. And now we have the starting point, and it's good to continue here
Yes.
the present study and to provide more details on it and its results. So before the actual presentation of the consortium results, I will give you a quick overview of the project aims and study phases so that you can have the basic information when you listen to the presentations. So again, I try to change my slide. Okay, yes, very shortly. So as we know, environmental crises, including climate change, are the most greatest complementary challenges to humans and nature and our planet altogether. And one thing kind of to tackle this and move forward to help this situation is planning and doing interventions, and we urgently are needing those interventions that support both well-being to kind of enhance the resources of individuals and also to facilitate simultaneously pro-environmental behavior, because combining these two is known to be a good combination when you tackle these kind of huge problems. In this consortium, the framework is on effective environmental behavior change that builds on novel nature-based approach to facilitate emotional coping, nature connectedness, social support, and efficient pro-environmental behavior. So kind of all these basic research, well-known facets of research that need to be combined to kind of to get a more holistic view on these associations, and also this will provide us ways to kind of go forward and try those things that may actually help when we go forward and try to also have influence on these problems. So the basic aims include we aim to deepen the understanding of association between environmental emotions, coping strategies, pro-environmental behavior and well-being via longitudinal study conducted in Finland, in UK. So that's the first part where we have some results today, and the other part is to develop and evaluate a nature-based group intervention program to support pro-environmental behavior, nature connectedness, and well-being. And this will kind of be approached via piloting an intervention study, group form intervention study in Finland, and testing the feasibility of the intervention also in UK. So we have in Finland and UK both similar kind of approaches, not specifically exactly the same, but we will hear more of them in the presentations. And finally, just to show you the research data we have collected, as I mentioned, there are questionnaires, studies conducted both in Finland and in UK. So we have 3 waves of questionnaires, 23, 24, and 25, and similar content and timing of the data, both in Finland and UK. So here you can see the basic numbers of the participants in the 3 collection waves or years. And then for the second aim, we have the intervention data, where the Finnish data includes almost 200 participants, of which 50% are in the intervention group and half of them in the control group. So and that was collected in 23 and 25. and UK feasibility intervention data is collected a little later, taking advantage of the learnings and findings of the Finnish intervention. So it's a little bit smaller, and Eleanor Radcliffe will tell you more about this UK intervention. So now we move on to the results presentations, and first we hear about well-being benefits of nature spots. Emily MacDonald from Surrey University will present her results. Please.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Sansa. So I'm going to be talking today about favourite outdoor places in the UK and in Finland, and in particular focusing on our findings around the restorative benefits relating to different place types and features in these two countries. So for a while now within environmental psychology, there's been really good evidence that nature can support our well-being by helping us to recover from the kind of stress and attention demands that we tend to experience in our everyday lives. And there's also really good evidence that when we have a strong emotional bond with the particular place we're in, so for example, if it's a favourite place to which we feel really attached, maybe we visit regularly, we have lots of memories associated with that place, then that place may be especially restorative for us in helping us to kind of recover our attention and to improve our well-being through doing this. And so based on this, Corpella and colleagues proposed the idea of favourite place prescriptions in one of their papers. So perhaps the idea that people can be encouraged to seek out a local place and try to visit it on multiple occasions in order to benefit from this restorative relationship with a particular environment or place. And this is kind of akin perhaps to the kind of exercise prescriptions like health walks we might see in some health services, that more around kind of our relationship with the environment. And so to better shape these kind of potential favourite place interventions, we perhaps need a better understanding of several aspects that shape people's relationships with their favourite places and how they experience restoration there. So in particular, there's perhaps a slightly limited understanding in some areas of the more specific outdoor favourite place types that might exist, and how they might differ potentially in supporting restoration. So for example, two recent studies found that people tend to report quite a wide mixture of outdoor favourite places in urban places, which do include less natural places such as city squares like the one you can see here, or terraces, as well as things like forests. So it would be good to get a better understanding of what favourite place types are reported and how they may differ in supporting restoration. And these studies also did find that there were some differences between countries and cultures in terms of the favourite place types that were preferred most. But interestingly, these studies, as well as many others in the area, do focus more so on university samples. So there is perhaps a gap here to look into different types of outdoor place types across and between kind of cultures, but looking at kind of the wider population within these countries. And so I think the UK and Finland offer a really interesting comparison in terms of this for several reasons. Firstly, they have very different geographies. So if we think about Finland and the UK in terms of their population density, there's much more kind of land per person in Finland, whereas the UK is much more densely populated. And there are also landscape differences, like quite considerable ones. So the landscapes in the UK tend to be quite pastoral and urban. So for example, the kind of rolling hills you can see in the bottom picture here in the countryside, or perhaps, cities where parks are more common. Whereas in Finland, 70% of the land is forest, and there are a lot more lakes than there are in the UK. So very different types of nature in these outdoor environments. And even when it comes to cities and city green space, there's more green space per person in cities such as Helsinki than perhaps in London, for example, in the UK. And these geographical differences are also kind of compounded by some political differences around access to land. So in Finland, there's everyman's right, which means that people can freely access the countryside. Whereas in the UK, with the exception of Scotland, there's no right to roam. So land is very much felt as a private kind of space that you can't necessarily just wander into. In addition to this, there are also some cultural differences between the two countries that may affect people's relationship with the outdoors. So there's a kind of long-established tradition in Finland of retreating to a summer cottage during the holidays to spend time by the lake or in the forest and kind of relax here with friends. And there's not really a direct parallel of that experience, perhaps, in the UK. Sorry, I'm not sure how that happened. And then there are also some differences in well-being that you might be aware of. You know, Finland often comes out top in things like the World Happiness Report. The UK doesn't tend to come out so highly in these kind of reports. So taken together, all these factors really may impact how people experience outdoor spaces in these two different kind of countries and cultures. So to better explore favourite place types in these places and how they may impact restoration, we conducted an online survey in spring 2023. And this is the first wave survey that Samsa was talking about before. So there were 1,120 adults participating from the south of England. And then there were 667 adults participating in Finland in this survey. And in terms of the favourite places, participants were asked to first of all describe a favourite outdoor place. And we think this is maybe a good advantage here that by asking them to kind of qualitatively describe the place and then coding it, we're able to perhaps see unique cultural places that emerge rather than presenting a list of categories and assuming it may be the same for each culture. Participants were then asked to rate the presence of 7 key physical features within the environment. So, for example, the presence of quiet and calm, the presence of greenery. And they were also then asked to report their perceived restorative outcomes associated with that environment. So in terms of coding the outdoor place descriptions, this was done separately in the UK and Finland, but using a very similar process. In general, we tended to go with the main word that participants use. So for example, quiet park with greenery and lake, we coded as park. And then once we had our initial codes, some of these were collapsed together. So for example, within the UK data, fields, meadows, and countryside became the wider category of countryside. And we excluded responses if no favourite place type was reported, if they mentioned an indoor place, since we were exploring outdoor spaces specifically, or if a place couldn't be identified based on the description. So what kind of favourite places did people typically report? So in the UK, parks were the most commonly reported favourite place type, with 28% of participants falling into this category. And this was then followed by beaches and coasts, and then closely by forests and woodland. Countryside was about 10% of participants' favourite place type. And then rivers, ponds, and lakes. And finally, gardens at about 5% of people reporting this as a favourite place type. And then beyond this, there were also some smaller categories that people reported, such as sports grounds that made up a smaller proportion of the favourite place types. And then comparing this to Finland, forests were the most popular favourite place type. About a quarter of people, their favourite places were forests. And this was closely followed though by beaches, coast and lakeshore areas. Interestingly, cottages did emerge as the third most popular favourite place type in Finland. Parks and gardens for about 10% of participants. And then paths and trails, again, perhaps a category slightly unique to Finland here, was reported after this. 7% of people had built favourite place types. And then again, there were some much smaller other categories beyond this. So did these favourite place types differ in terms of how restorative participants felt them to be? So we conducted an ANOVA for each country using the 6 most popular favourite place types that you just saw on the previous slide. And we controlled for age, gender, and nature connectedness. And so there was a significant effect of place type on restoration in both the UK and in Finland. As we can see here in the UK, beaches and coasts and forests and woodlands were significantly more restorative than parks and also than gardens. And the countryside was more restorative than gardens. So perhaps the slightly more less private spaces like forests, countryside, beaches, having more restoration associated with them here than parks and gardens. And then in Finland, cottages were actually the most restorative, or associated with the most restorative outcomes. And that was compared with most other categories here. So some interesting differences in how these places may support restoration, and also in how this may kind of differ between countries here. Next, we asked the question, do the favourite place features we looked at, such as greenery or peace and quiet, affect restorative outcomes? And so we conducted multiple linear regression models controlling for age, gender, and nature connectedness for both, firstly, the UK and secondly, Finland. And the features did significantly predict restoration in both the UK and in Finland, explaining around 28% of variance in the UK and around 13% in Finland. So in the UK, natural sounds were the strongest predictor of restoration, whereas in Finland, it was the quiet and calm that was the strongest predictor. In both countries, beautiful views and quiet and calm were significant. Yes, so beautiful views and quiet and calm, the most significant predictors. Were positive significant predictors, whereas the presence of shops was a negative predictor in both countries. So we can see here some similarities between what was reported in the UK and Finland. But there were also some interesting differences. So natural sounds, greenery and water significantly predicted restoration in the UK, but not in Finland. And the presence of other people significantly predicted restoration in Finland, but not in the UK. So to draw these things together and conclude a little here, in terms of favourite place types, we identified a range of green, blue, mixed and built favourite place types in both the UK and in Finland. And we did find some interesting country-specific preferences. For example, in the UK, parks were the most commonly reported favourite place type, whereas forests were in Finland. And perhaps this relates to what people can access, as described earlier, in terms of, more urban space in the UK with parks and less access to the outdoors, and a lot of forest land in Finland. Interestingly, we also found some specific place types that were unique to, culturally unique to Finland, such as the summer cottage. So this highlights the importance of taking a culturally informed approach when looking at favourite places. We did find that restoration varied depending on place type too. So for example, in the UK, forests and coasts were more restorative than parks, really emphasising the perhaps potential well-being benefits that could be gained by enabling better access to these places, perhaps introducing a right to roam in this country may help, or better public transport links to get to these places, better cycling lanes, all these kind of considerations. And interestingly, in Finland, the summer cottage was the most restorative. So this shows, again, the well-being benefits associated with this long-established tradition here. And also maybe it's helpful to reflect on who may have access and who may not within Finland. So perhaps for one example, recent migrants, they may not have the connections, the social connections to have access to these cottages. And it may be that enabling that somehow really might support their well-being as they integrate into the country. just as one example. And then moving on to the favourite place features, we found that beautiful views, quiet and calm were significant predictors, positive ones in both countries, whereas shops negatively predicted restoration. So it would be interesting for future research to perhaps explore whether this is universal, whether these factors predict restoration across more countries, especially outside of Europe, or whether perhaps this is specific to Northern European countries, perhaps to norms around spending time in solitude in nature, or more introverted kind of cultural norms. We also found some interesting differences, particularly I think that water wasn't a significant predictor in Finland, but was in the UK, but there are a lot of lakes in Finland. So it might be worth considering why this is. Perhaps in the UK, water is more unique and that lends itself more to restoration when people encounter it. Perhaps something for future research to consider there. And then also the fact that other people was a significant predictor in Finland, but not in the UK. And perhaps this relates to the summer cottage experience. So while there are lots of strengths in terms of our research here, we do acknowledge some limitations. For example, slight differences in sampling. UK sample were recruited via Qualtrics with a £1.50 incentive, whereas the Finnish sample were recruited through letters and didn't receive the incentives. They may have been more intrinsically motivated. We weren't able to control for social economic status here, which may influence things like how much time people have to access more remote natural settings, or the equipment they need to have to access those settings. And it's also worth noting that we may not be able to apply this to all areas of the UK or Finland. For example, since participants were from the south of England, this may not relate to, say, Scotland or Wales or other places in England. In terms of applications of this research, well, there are some important implications here for land management design. For example, perhaps incorporating beautiful views of water in the UK, or ensuring calm and quiet in Finland. In terms of land access policy, as discussed, with the right to roam in the UK, and thinking about how we can encourage people to find the right sort of environments that may best support restoration to form as a favourite place. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions that there might be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. Great presentation and very nice results, but I'm afraid that we need to move forward because time flies, and we need to kind of ensure that all the presenters will have the scheduled time for the presentations. So we move onwards, and next Katina Hyvänen will talk us about environmental emotions as drivers of pro-environmental behavior and well-being.
Yeah, thank you for your patience, and thank you, Emily, for great presentation, and also welcome to the webinar on my behalf. So I'm Katina Hyvänen, Senior Researcher at the Jamk University of Applied Sciences, and presenting our findings on environmental emotions and their relation with pro-environmental behavior and well-being, and these analyses and findings and been done in our research group. It's been a great joint effort, collecting the data and also doing the analysis. I'm also presenting some findings from Salla Seppänen, who's been a master's student in our project and written her master's thesis on these results. I realized that we are a bit tight with the time, so I tried to go and spend as much time as possible in the findings, and just giving a shorter introduction to the themes and background. What I could say in the beginning is that we are looking at environmental emotions in more general, but our environmental emotions research is based on climate emotions wheel. So it's the great work that Panu Pihkala has been doing in Finland, and also other researchers on climate emotions. So the research has often focused on anxiety-related aspects of client emotions, fluctuating from emotional experiences of worry, distress, and anxiety. And hope has been slightly less studied, but most studied from the positive climate emotions, as there can be really a range of emotions that people experience in relation to climate change, and of course for environmental changes as well. So wanting to emphasize that constructive hope, so based on solutions and collective action, is something that's seen and found very important in terms of buffering against distress and motivating towards pro-environmental behaviors, in ways of supporting resilience, adaptive coping, and feeling, having a sense of control of a situation. And it's good to remember that these emotions coexist and co-occur. So there's a range of experience that people go through as a reaction to the environment and climate change. So in our research, we are looking at environmental emotions as psychological responses to ecological degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And from previous research that we well know that emotions connect to action. And there's, for instance, evidence from cross-sectional studies as well as diary studies. This is an example of a diary study where pleasant emotions such as hope and pride and eudaimonic well-being, which is meaningful action, has been related to more sustainable actions, especially those actions that can feel quite effortful behaviors and social and active. Whereas unpleasant emotions have had mixed effects. They can motivate, but also cause distress. And the following presentations by my colleagues are talking much more about emotional engagement, but also here to remember that coming from a place where emotional engagement is seen as a key for change readiness. What I really like this research is the reminder that also pro-environmental behavior can support well-being. So it's often underestimated the well-being effects of actual pro-environmental behavior. In my presentation, I also included a conceptual model that's been adapted from a framework. And looking at in the darker green, I have the connections and what that we are looking in these analyses. So we are looking at the background factors such as education, residential area, access to green space, age, sex, nature, connectedness, how they are related to environmental emotions, and then again how these relate to the pro-environmental behavior and well-being. Other factors, of course, are also very important. Just as a backdrop, I wanted to draw attention to planetary well-being, which again comes up also in the later presentations. But just a reminder and recognizing the interdependence and our reliance on the health of the Earth. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to move beyond anthropocentric and human-centered well-being and looking at further, so not just looking at individual needs, but trying to think of ecosystem integrity. However, we are focusing on self-report data and self-report on well-being and self-report on pro-environmental behavior, but we hope that this is the step to the right direction. And research questions guiding this presentation and future publications are related to looking at the underlying dimensions of environmental emotions, and also how these dimensions relate to well-being and pro-environmental behavior at baseline. We're also looking at how these dimensions predict changes in well-being and pro-environmental behavior over time, and whether the changes in these emotions also predict changes in well-being and pro-environmental behavior over time. We are using the same sample of participants as described in Emily's presentation. So we have a randomly were sampled participants who were contacted and asked to participate. Of those, 667 participated in wave 1, and then we had 1 year and 2 year follow-ups for the first survey. And I noticed there were questions earlier about where the participant came from. So our UK participants came from Southern England, and this was panel data, so slightly different way collecting the data. In 1 year follow-up, we had 217 participants, and then we also have 1 year and 2 year follow-ups. So then again, it's good to note that we have selected data. So although, for example, we had panel data in UK first, then those participants, only 200 of them continued. So then also the panel data became selected for probably people who are more interested in environmental issues. And these analyses been conducted among those people who responded at least twice. I noticed there were questions also about our measures. We can see some details of the environmental emotion measures, and as well as our well-being measures. With health-related quality of life comes from a larger health survey, although we focus on the psychological aspects of health, and use the mental well-being scale, which is well used and validated, and life satisfaction scale. The pro-environmental scale and measure that there has been questions, I think, in the chat. It's a long measure that has been developed for this research, as well as we used previous scales to combine to get as a good measure as possible. We're trying to include and take count also the planetary boundaries, so quite a range of actions that we've been asking. And this is a manuscript in preparation that we hope that will be finished fairly soon. And here's information about the analyses. But I moved to the results so we can also move the other presentations. These are four factor and the factor analyses that yielded the 4-factor solution, looking at emotional distress, emotions, self-blame related emotions, positive emotions called a positive outlook that included hope, enthusiasm, empowerment, and skeptical emotions that included skepticism, rejection, and disbelief. We omitted from the factor structure desire to make amends, aversion, and interest, which are items that loaded on different factors at different measurement times. Notice that these emotions and dimensions relate to background factors. For example, distress-related emotions were more common among Finnish and younger and among female participants, and those with stronger nature connectedness. Self-blame in turn was related to green space being further away, being female, and having a stronger nature connectedness. Positive type emotions again were more common among older individuals and those with stronger nature connectedness. As skeptical emotions were then related to higher among individuals with lower education. We only found cross-sectional relationships here, so the emotional distress was related to higher pro-environmental behaviour. In the combined data with the UK participants and Finnish participants, we found that also related to reduction in life satisfaction. In turn, positive outlook related to higher well-being and higher pro-environmental behavior at baseline among all participants, and among only Finnish it related to increase in life satisfaction over time. I just want to say quickly about Salla's findings about interest, and finding that the environmental emotion of interest mediated the relationship between human-nature relationship and pro-environmental behavior. So this might be an important catalyst for pro-environmental behavior. Yes, I realized that Ellie and Kirsi are probably waiting already for their turn. We have some time for questions later on. And I guess here in the end, guess what I could kind of summarize and emphasize is that the importance of positive climate and environmental emotions, how important they are in terms of the protective and action-oriented. So, and they're kind of complementing the negative emotions or distressing emotions. They're not kind of, can't see as they're replacing them, but they're kind of supporting them, can be kind of almost like a resource caravan that helping to generate optimism and empowerment to take action. But generally, in our data, these emotions and pro-environmental behavior and well-being were quite stable over the time, and there wasn't enough maybe changes in the variable level to really see that changes would predict changes, or level would predict change in future in this data. Okay, well, thank you for your time, and looking forward to questions and comments afterwards, after the presentations.
Yes, thanks a lot, Katriina. Very nice presentation and thought-provoking results. Yes, next we will have two presenters within 15 minutes. Let's see how it works. So we have Kirsi Salonen from Tampere University, and then Eleanor Radcliffe from Surrey University. Please.
So I will introduce you to Act with Nature intervention in Finland. My name is Kirsi Salonen, postdoctoral researcher in Tampere University. And after me, Eleanor Radcliffe is going to tell you about the Act with Nature intervention, how it was implemented in the UK. So, the ON Act with Nature intervention aims to improve both human well-being and to promote pro-environmental behavior. And it includes nature-based exercises, nature-based methods, as well as information and encouragement to support pro-environmental actions. And the synonym could be also environmentally friendly actions. And these actions are grounded in 4 critical planetary boundaries, especially climate change and biosphere integrity. And although the nature-based methods were developed during this project, they are built on the earlier intervention and methods, especially flow with nature intervention. Kalevi Korpela was mentioned that earlier, and also on mindfulness methods. During this project, the development of the intervention, we created logic models to clarify and to ensure that all key mechanisms were included in the design of this intervention. So these mechanisms can also be understood as the building blocks of the intervention that together shape the overall impact of the intervention. These mechanisms include especially, of course, nature exposure, nature connectedness, social contacts, and social support. But in addition to that, it includes also psychological tools. They are important, such as coping with environmental self-regulation. And especially for promoting pro-environmental actions, environmental friendly actions, the goals are also important for that sense. And here you see active nature processes in phases. So this intervention is phase-based, just like our earlier intervention, which I mentioned earlier, Flow with Nature. And it's grounded in the idea that just like social relationships, they require certain conditions, they require certain support to develop into the trusting, safe, and accepting connections. In similar way, the human-nature relationships also need support to evolve from exposure to a deeper emotional nature connectedness and more conscious environmental self-regulation. So here you see the key elements of this intervention, and they vary depending on the goals of each phase. For example, this growth phase. One important aim of the growth phase is to support processing also those difficult environmental related emotions, such like anxiety. And the tools, psychological tools, are designed to support this kind of goals. And in contrast, this flourishing, this final phase, the focus shifts toward fostering a sense of hope for the future. And the methods are tailored to support that kind of goals. And then more about these nature-based exercises, nature-based methods in practice. We have a wide range of exercises and methods in our intervention. And they can be understood and divided into two main ways. First, based on where the participants' attention is primarily directed with help of these exercises, either towards nature, trees, water, etc., or towards human, such as bodily sensations like own breathing. So secondly, the exercises differ in how participants are guided in our intervention, and that can be called like facilitation styles. In precise facilitation, participants are given clear instructions, for example, to focus on their breathing, or focus is on a specific nature element. In suggestive facilitation, participants are instead invited to notice themselves what in nature draws their attention. And they are encouraged to identify the place or nature elements that feels inviting and to find their own way of connecting with nature. But anyway, the ON program includes all this kind of nature exercises from all 4 fields. Actually, this information which I now give you is already published in our first method paper, which is published in Ecopsychology. So, in practice, ON program lasts for 12 weeks, and it has several implementation modes. And they are depending on participants' own needs and their ability to commit to the program. So we offered them to participate weekly groups or flexible groups. And participants in weekly groups, they receive more social support from both group and the facilitator. Instead, flexible groups allow participants to follow their own timetable, so the exercises can be completed independently, anytime and anywhere they want during the program. However, they receive less social support. Anyway, across all groups, nature-based exercises take place in nearby nature, either independently or with the group and facilitator. Sorry, my cat is a bit disturbing here. Nature elements take my attention also. And in addition, all participants are encouraged to engage in pro-environmental actions, concrete actions in their everyday lives. And all this material, as you see here, and exercises, nature-based exercises, are provided through the program's online platform freely for participants. So that was my part, and I will now hand over to Eleanor Ratcliffe, and she will explain how the intervention was implemented in the UK. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Kirsi. I'm just going to share my screen as well. Do you see what I'm sharing on my screen? Maybe Kirsi could confirm for me. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm here to say a little bit about how the Act with Nature intervention was translated into a UK context, and I will try to keep it very brief since I know we're short on time. As Emily mentioned earlier, the UK and Finland have quite a lot of differences, both in kind of terms of their geography and landscape, culture, and also how people interact socially, both in course also kind of their daily lifestyle habits and also in relation to nature. I've lived now in both countries, so I had that own personal experience, and I realized living in Finland that engagement with nature, I think, is much more of a kind of part of everyday culture than it might be in the UK. So this is something we wanted to try and incorporate into seeing whether there are differences in the interventions we might propose in this project to support planetary well-being. And what we ended up doing in the UK is piloting a 6-week fully remote intervention, adapting the parts of the Act of Nature intervention from Finland where we could, but tailoring it to this UK context. So let me show you a little bit more about what we did there to support that. So in spring last year, we conducted a feasibility study where we drew on the materials from the intervention developed in Finland. And this feasibility study involved 8 participants. These were actually people who took part in our earlier surveys and had indicated they were willing to support the project in other ways. So that's very nice. And we translated into English an abbreviated version of the materials from the Finnish intervention. So exercises over 6 weeks. And we invited them to try out those online materials and also participate in an outdoor workshop where we worked through a couple of exercises together in a remote setting via Teams. And so after that, once the participants had a chance to try out this test version of the intervention, we conducted a focus group with them as a follow-up to ask about their perspectives and what they thought the strengths and weaknesses might be of this intervention proposal. And this was very helpful because what happened is that the participants highlighted a need for manageable weekly commitments. They were unsure about whether anything more than 6 weeks would really be feasible for them. So that's why we stuck with 6 rather than 12 weeks. They were very keen on online delivery rather than doing things face-to-face, so they could fit it into their schedules with flexible timing, so doing things asynchronously in their own time and pace, and also clarifying things a bit around kind of setting an environmental goal and clarifying a bit around the materials. So kind of just making it a little bit more kind of short form and accessible for our UK participants. So that was very helpful. And then since then, we've been trialing this short form intervention with 3 kind of cohorts of participants. So the first cohort was in summer last year, 2025. We had a group of 8 participants completing that. And those participants were drawn still from our survey participants, plus a few from wider advertising on social media. And so these were people of a working age, not students, coming from different walks of life. Some were interested because they were interested in nature, and some were, like I say, from our survey participants. Then we continued with 2 further cohorts, one in the autumn last year, and then one that's just coming to the end now, so about 19, 20 participants in each cohort. And both of these cohorts were students at the University of Surrey. So this was a bit of a departure from our earlier recruitment strategy. We were finding it very difficult to recruit more participants who were kind of from the general population of working age. And due to the kind of the limited time frame and scope we had for this project, we decided to pivot and offer this as a planetary wellbeing intervention for our student population here. And students at our university take part in research projects for course credit or lab tokens. So this is a bit of a change in who we're targeting, but it turned out to be quite beneficial because these students were interested in planetary well-being, both in terms of supporting themselves and dealing with stress due to their studies, also thinking about their interactions with the natural environment, and moving towards a more mindful, sustainable lifestyle. So we've just come to the end of the week, last week of this intervention here. And in this next slide, I'll show you a little bit about the participant journey. So it lasted 6 weeks. As I said, we had a baseline survey and an online workshop in week 1, after which participants set their environmental goal. In week 2, they did self-directed exercises. In week 3, they had again another online workshop doing exercises and discussion. Weeks 4 and 5 were self-directed. And then in week 6, we had a final online group workshop, and they completed a second survey of our outcome measures. And then after another 6 weeks follow-up, so at week 12, they completed the final survey. And that's where we are with the last group at the moment. Because this is quite a small test of a quite different intervention to Finland, one of the things we think actually is a strength of this UK test is kind of reflecting on the process of creating and implementing an intervention. Because throughout the journey, we've seen some quite interesting trade-offs. So our participants wanted something that was flexible and remote, but we noticed also kind of variable level of engagement with the online materials. So maybe there's kind of what people say they want and then what works in practice as well. We have to, like I say, switch our sample in order to recruit sufficient participants, but overall it does mean there are some difficulties making direct comparisons between what we've done in the UK and what we've done in Finland for a number of reasons. In the discussion sessions with our participants in the intervention, what we found is that students really valued having this space for mindful nature engagement. So even though sometimes there were challenges in getting them to accommodate this in their schedule, if they took the time to come to the workshops and to engage with the materials, they really reported how beneficial it was to them. And it was supporting them and thinking about things to do with their lifestyle as well. So the qualitative and lived experience feedback has been really useful along the way. And overall, and lastly, I think this exercise has given us a lot of learning material about how to create a viable intervention. So strengths and challenges, workflows, how to build the right set of materials. And I think something we could do, even though the project is coming to an end, is maybe do a co-design activity where we have another workshop or focus group with intervention participants, with facilitators, and maybe with practitioners outside of this project context as well, to talk about these trade-offs and challenges and strengths and weaknesses. So I notice in the literature, quite many interventions are being proposed, but kind of a how-to guide could be really beneficial to add to that literature as well. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. and Kirsi also. Very nice presentations. And now we have the basic knowledge of the intervention as such. So we have a final presentation given by Jane Vakkolanvaara, who will provide us some first results of the intervention in Finland. Jane, please.
Thank you, Samsa. Thank you. And thank you, Kirsi and Eli, for your lovely presentations, and Katriina and Emily too. So we've heard about our research, we've heard about the intervention, and now we're looking at the Finnish intervention bit. And we conducted a randomized controlled trial, and I'm super excited to be presenting the results to you. So we established the ground stones. The problem is the environmental crisis, and what we are doing, as Kirsi told us, is building nature-based intervention to tackle these issues. And these are the main elements we've been using, as Kirsi presented in the logic model. And we know nature-based interventions work, but the gap that's been present in research is that the most of the research has been correlational. So there's only limited experiential studies and even less randomized controlled trials. And the mechanisms the change happens with or by are rarely tested. So we are looking at whether or not our active nature intervention actually increased for pro-environmental behavior and well-being as we suspected, and whether or not the delivery format mattered. So as Kirsi told us, we had in Finland, we had weekly groups and we had flexible groups that had fewer meetings and more independent work. And then we're going to have a look at if the proposed mechanisms explained for the effects. So nature connectedness and coping with environmental emotions.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jane, but can you change the view to the presentation mode?
Oh, I thought I did. So let's see. There's some. Let's try if it works now. Okay. Is it working now?
Yeah, now perfect. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for interrupting. I was under the impression that I was already in the presentation mode. Good. Okay, so let's see how did we. Yeah. In Finland, we had 188 participants, 94 in the intervention group and 94 in the control group. And most of our participants were female, and working age adults were the group. And the average age was 48.7 years old. And there were no significant differences in the background variables in the intervention and the control groups. We had quite a good response rates in the first round and a bit lower in the second round in the post-intervention assessment. And we had a few dropouts during the intervention period. So we had 20 participants in the weekly groups that met each week, 53 in the flexible groups, 54 that should be. Oh, I think this has the dropouts included. Okay, and so we had quite a few dropouts. We had 9 dropouts from the control group and 21 from the intervention group. And this is interesting to ponder why that might be. But we found no differences between dropouts and the remaining participants in terms of the background variables. We had our statistician, Harto Hakonen, an excellent statistician to run the analysis with us. We used linear mixed effects models to compare the pre-post differences in the control and the intervention group. And for the mediation analysis, we used serial mediation analysis to test the proposed mechanisms of the intervention. We assessed pro-environmental behavior, and Kirsi kindly told us a bit about how we came up with those items for that measure. And then we had band 9, so that's emotional well-being or vitality subscale from this wider health survey. And then mental well-being, psychological well-being, we used TWEMS for that. And then we measured coping with environmental emotions with single item that asks whether or not the participants felt they had enough ways of coping with their environmental emotions. And this is just a quick example of the exercises we did. So just to let you in that we had a multitude of different aspects in our exercises, as Kirsi told us. And just a short recap, we had weekly groups and flexible groups. Weekly groups met on a regular basis weekly and had a greater social support. And the flexible groups met 3 times, either online or face-to-face in nature, either way. And most of the exercises they did whenever they had the time to do them. And now the most exciting part, the results. Did the intervention actually work? Well, good news. As for pro-environmental behavior, we see that the red line is the weekly intervention group, and the green line is the flexible intervention group, and the blue line is the control group. And pro-environmental behavior increased in the intervention groups compared to the control. So this was suspected. So we had them set environmental or goals for pro-environmental behavior, and it didn't matter which delivery format of the intervention they participated in, pro-environmental behavior increased. So we can affect to behavior or actions with these kinds of nature-based interventions, or at least act with nature intervention. As for psychological well-being, well, this is a bit different. Again, the red line is for the weekly intervention group, the green line is for the flexible intervention group, and the blue line is the control group. And psychological well-being improved only in the weekly format compared to the control group. As you see, the psychological well-being increases in the flexible intervention group as well, but the results were not, or the differences were not statistically significant. And you remember that the weekly format or the weekly group met more regularly, and perhaps they also did the exercises on a more regular basis, and they also received the support of the group facilitator and the group more often. As for the emotional well-being or the vitality, the subscale of the life quality, we saw no statistical differences, but you can see that again, the blue line is the control group. The emotional well-being actually is slightly decreased during the intervention, and the same is visible for the flexible intervention. The differences are not statistically significant, but anyway, you can tell that for the weekly intervention, again, there's a slight increase, even though the differences are not significant. And we suspected that nature connectedness would mediate or account for the changes alongside with coping with environmental emotions, but we came up with different results as we ran the mediation analysis, and neither of these, neither nature connectedness nor coping with environmental emotions mediated the changes that we witnessed. So even though the mechanisms seem to be different from what we expected, we did witness increase in pro-environmental behavior in both of the intervention formats. And we also witnessed psychological well-being improving in the weekly format. So this is intriguing. What might explain the changes then? But just a short recap, pro-environmental behavior increased. That's awesome. Well-being, psychological well-being changes changed in the weekly format. So getting more support and maybe getting more nature exposure, nature connection yielded changes in well-being. And the suspected mechanisms of change were not supported in the mediation analysis. Well, before the conclusions, I just want to shortly say that we did have, as studies always do, quite a few limitations. We only had Finnish participants, and we only used self-reported measures. And we had two different formats that might have been quite different, even though the exercises were exactly the same. And they were all done in nature environments. But one could argue if the intervention is still one intervention, even though the delivery formats were different. We don't have specific information about how the flexible group engaged in the intervention or how often they actually did the exercises we provided to them on a weekly basis. And also the measures we used for this sub-study of this research project are likely to capture only a piece of the whole picture, because we are thinking maybe, this is the next slide. Oh, and the environmental factors might have an effect. What kind of nature the participants used, how is the nature different in Finland and in UK? We didn't compare Finland and UK at this stage because the interventions are somewhat different, and also the gathering of the data has been ongoing in UK. But then probably about the conclusions before we get a chance to enter a discussion phase of this webinar. So behavior change, we witnessed behavior change without the expected mechanisms. So we were thinking maybe nature connectedness might not be a lever for change, but more like a baseline condition that we need in order to engage in environmentally friendly actions. It seems that social context matters. So it's really beneficial for us humans to be in contact with with fellow humans and get support, share our emotions, thoughts, maybe get some new ideas, maybe build up some hope together. And what we are thinking is that these interventions, nature-based interventions, likely are multi-component systems that have a wide range of interconnecting mechanisms that affect each other. So as Kirsi was telling us, we had multiple different key mechanisms we were thinking might have something to do with the change. And that I think, and we believe that that's what we are witnessing here. So when we are in tackling planetary well-being issues, problems with environmental crises, it's advisable to pay attention to building interventions that open up these different levels of being human and being in connection with each other and with the natural environments around us.
Yes, thank you very much, Janne. Very nice results, and again, something to think about the mechanisms and moving forward from these results.